This is the text-to-speech audio version of The Observer by Philosopher. To read the full article, including analysis of trends we're observing and other content, or to join the conversation, check us out on Substack at darkphilosopher.substack.com or on Twitter at Observer Trends or anywhere podcasts are broadcast. Article title: The Four Horsemen of the Economic Apocalypse. Article subtitle: The Boomer Retirement Crisis. Forgive us, for we know not what we do. A letter to the four greatest generations I've ever known. Boomers. On justice. Or, as our southern citizens might say, the chickens come home to roost eventually. The problem with being the most selfish generation who got everything they ever wanted, when they wanted it, is that the party doesn't last forever. Even if it has lasted for 50+ years, plus or minus a few periods of instability. A testament to the studious work of the generation before more so than those after, but also not really. Though I'm certainly not celebrating the highly likely outcome and, therefore, the almost entire collapse of our forefathers and mothers into poverty. Your generation's future and current suffering will set the tone for future generations. The myth of retirement, they might call it one day. Hell no. We won't go. Quote from 1968 Vietnam protests. As millennials will often bemoan, boomers have sunk, destroyed, or ruined almost every institution they have ever touched, leaving behind a wake of destruction that was only made worse by the hapless generation, Generation Gen X, who was just as quick to follow in their destruction with their own inputs of institutionalized emotional fragility. Think, lawsuits over hot coffee without warning labels, except far more catastrophic and wide-reaching. For decades, the coming retirement crisis has been on the radar of governments and media. It specifically entered my radar in 2012 when I was mapping demographic trends forward, where I came across an obscure article written on the topic. The article mentioned that boomers haven't saved enough and put a happy spin on the entire situation. So I dug a little deeper, and there wasn't anything happy about it. As we understand it, the lay of the land is relatively straightforward. For boomers to safely retire, three concurrent things need to happen for their pensions and savings to outlive them. Number one, they need the housing market to continually increase in value, measured against inflation, or at minimum, to maintain its current valuations. Number two, they need their investment portfolios, for the 40% or so who even have them to, at a minimum, maintain current value and hopefully increase more than inflation. Number three, they need money markets to stabilize as they relate to inflation and bonds, which many of you own or invest in, as your parents did. None of these three things is projected to happen, at least not in the way boomers think it will. For starters, there are the massive unfunded public liabilities of pension funds held by state, local, and federal governments. Tens of billions of dollars that should have been invested over the last few decades, which weren't due to mismanagement. States like Illinois, for example. Then there is the prospect of millennials and Generation Z who need to stabilize an income enough to purchase a home, preferably more than one. To balance out the income disparities within our own demographic and the sizable disparity between the boomers and our generation in pure numbers. Also, given the recent actions by the Federal Reserve, which were taken in large part to protect your parents, the silent generation, and early retirees currently from the catastrophic losses they would suffer if the Fed rate were to suddenly spike to 12 to 18 as Volcker did in the 1980s crash. The initial cash out, which would appear to be a heavy bonus for some of you, supercharging your money market accounts. Yet the fallout from a federal debt default, the liquidation of almost all bonds and debt obligations, and the systematic wiping of trillions of value off the markets was just too much for people to handle. All of these elements, of course, were supposed to occur in the 2008 crash or even the 2012 crash, which was, as the saying goes, kicked down the road a little further. The government and media know all this. Of course, they've known much longer than I have. The writing has been on the wall for decades. This means we've had decades to fix the problems in our economic and social systems. Still, this was entirely untenable, if not impossible, because of backlash from both the economy, read, hedge funds and banks, and the electorate, read, you. Quote, "It's the economy, stupid." President Clinton and David Campbell, 1992. No president in any of our generations has had the political capital required to even attempt such a maneuver to recover our system and, in effect, save all of us from what can only be seen as our impending reckoning. Excluding perhaps President Kennedy, who, for all his faults, never served long enough to accomplish any of his lofty goals or even long enough to disappoint us as all politicians inevitably do. Quote, "We are all Keynesians now." President Nixon, 1971. Perhaps as a comfort for you and the rest of us, none of this is your fault. This inflationary system was never designed to outlive us. Governments were made big promises by foolish men long before any of us ever existed, that they could print and spend to prosperity. A bold lie, but an intoxicating one. What government doesn't want to be told they can have their tanks and Social Security too? With that said, I want to impart two things to you before we continue. One is a tidbit of a story regarding Maynard Keynes, the economic engineer who is ultimately responsible for this disaster we are all now buried up to our necks in, which goes something like this. A man once asked Maynard, "Your inflationary system appears to only have an effective life cycle of 100 years. What then?" To which the economist stoutly replied, "Who cares? We will all be dead by then." The second is a book I recommend to anyone over 45 as a mandatory reading. In fact, drop everything you're doing if you are over that age and buy this book immediately. Quote, "The Fourth Turning: What Cycles of History Tell Us About America's Next Rendezvous with Destiny" by William Strauss and Neil Howe, published in 1997. Looking across the landscape today, financial advice articles have certainly taken a turn for the worst from just a decade ago. With the projected average savings of boomers initially around $500,000 plus, the current paltry $200K or less is astounding to read and infuriating to accept. 10 years ago, publications such as AARP would broadcast the rosiest of potentials for your final years. Articles across the board about how to live your best life, places to visit, and different ways to spoil the grandchildren. Replaced today with constant reminders to save, pinch pennies, and seek further deductions from the inevitable losses incurred by daily living. Advice that spans across generations in today's age. Let me be the first millennial to say it. It's not entirely your fault. You made mistakes, as we all have and will. One of the biggest is trusting our core and fundamental systems to leaders who couldn't lead, and thinkers who were paid not to think. The funny thing about economists is that only those who say what we want to hear are the ones who are ever indeed heard. To the four horsemen of the coming economic apocalypse, I'd like but a moment of your time to speak to you. To the boomers, what we are about to face could become the greatest calamity in the modern era. This period will shake our hollow institutions to their cores and, in many ways, lead to the downfall of many of them. Unfortunately, as things begin to shake, many in my generation and others will see this as the opportunity to strike. They will utilize the battle armaments of memes, nihilism, and generational conflict to further destroy and ruin beyond what we've ever seen in history. In your desperation, you may find yourselves lashing out, making demands of us to satisfy debts and obligations we never made, ones we can't afford to satisfy. Any success you achieve here will only further the divides between us and, more crucially, extend our collective suffering for decades beyond your remaining lives. There may be a point in our future when you, the generation who refused the draft, are called to lead our young into battles you would never accept. There may be points where your own hypocrisy, selfishness, and idealism are brought out as a weapon against you. If I could ask one thing from you, it's to not lead us into damnation or ruination. Instead, I ask that you take the wisdom you have collectively gained over your many years and have some understanding for those who came after. You are our elders, our prophets, and our wisest teachers. The time for ego and selfishness has passed. Therefore, when this country calls upon you, please answer the call for the betterment of all, not merely yourselves. History will remember you not by how you were or are, but by how you acted in the end. Generation X. I've talked the most with your kin, above even my own. Always vocal and willing to defend yourselves until cornered. We exchanged many paragraphs deep in comments sections and forums. But, interestingly, you all seem to arrive at the exact final resolution, which is this. Quote, I don't care. I'll just move into the woods and watch it all burn. I want to say I understand as best I could be able. I have read about your lives, your childhoods, where your collective experience wasn't borderline child abuse, it was abhorrently criminal. Never has a generation of youth been ignored, disregarded, and exposed to such neglect and media violence. Generation Men not because you didn't care, but because no one gave a damn about you. Nihilism was your only choice in coping. Your own media was an expression of your collective misunderstood natures, angst, and longing for a place in this world or even outside it. For those of you with children, you raised us far more guarded against the world's evils than you ever were, and far more loved. For that, I thank you, even if my own parents will never hear these words. If I could ask any more than you've already given, I ask not for your compassion or empathy, not any more. This world can no longer run on such things, as it will only further its destruction. So instead, I ask perhaps the hardest thing I will ask of any of the four horsemen. I ask that you stop shrugging off the problems of this world. Stop your collective nihilism and spreading its infection to our youth. I ask that you take all that love you gave us as children, all the guardrails and protections, and remove them. Please stand with us in our battles, no longer on the sidelines. Your children can't succeed without you. Millennials, I see you, heroes of the age. Like me, you feel the injustice of our circumstances. You relate to the nihilism of those before you or don your armor and battle against it actively, crudely, and without forethought. Never once were we given the chances those before us received. College was a debt, more than an experience. Affordable housing is a dream, more than a possibility. Food and clothes are expenses, more than afterthoughts. Starting healthy families is a fairy tale, more than a path to be taken or pursued. Our men have been ruined by apathy, embraced by distraction, and culled from purpose. Our women have been led astray by old-world feminism, led to by vultures of meaning, and displaced from self. Many of you are warriors who feel displaced in this world of endless wars. You go to battle where you find it and wield swords to slash at everything broken, including those who came before, breaking more as you swing. The mistakes of the past can't be unwritten, but they can be remedied. We are the only generation capable of doing so, as we inherit this world together. Let us take stock of our history, not our present, as we pursue our future for the next generations and ourselves. As it stands, most of us will never retire, as this won't be affordable for us. Current projections suggest $24 million required by the time we reach that age. An impossible ask from a generation left with so little opportunity to build. If I could, I would lift the world upon my shoulders and carry you all into the future. Let you have your distractions and notions, to figure it out on your own as we grow together. Yet, this is impossible. I can't lift the world by myself. I can't fix everything that needs fixing, and I wouldn't even know where to start or end. What I know is this: if you find a burden, pick it up and carry it as far as possible. But if you falter, know that regardless of what happens in the world, I won't ever judge you for trying. There is a task for each of us in this world to do. At this point, some of you may begin your protests or insert your apathy. Suspend it. Remember, there will come a time one day when these Zoomers' children will come along and blame you as we have done of the Boomers. Then, they will ask us collectively what we did to fix the world. What will you say then? Quote, "Sorry, bro. I was too distracted with Tinder, or the gym, or staring into digital black mirrors reflecting what I wanted to see, instead of the world I needed to see." Every single one of us can do something. If you can draw for us. Share it with the world. Inspire our generational troops in the trenches. If you can sing, sing for us who can't. If you can make memes, make the best damn memes the world has ever seen. Hone your craft. Become the best there ever was, and if we fail, the best there ever will be. This world isn't much, and we've lost a lot, but the sacrifices required to gain back what we have today, once lost, are a debt none of us are prepared to pay. Act. If not for you, but for the rest of us who battle daily against our demons, our distractions, and our apathy. We are the heroes this world neither deserves nor wants, but the heroes in due time it will require. Generation Z. I don't know much about you yet, and neither do you. Looking ahead, you will become the gentle generation among us. Not because you are weak, but because you will one day be called to soothe the wounds, to replant the trees we uprooted, to calm the fires we lit in our battles. My only hope is that the world you inherit is better than the one we were given, and that you can forgive us of our trespasses, as we all attempt to forgive those who trespassed against us. This platform is my sword. In a world with so much wrong, any action taken to help must be right. Right. Wrong. To act requires wisdom, not empathy, and the ability to accept the consequences of our actions, as all actions have consequences, even the best ones. No single generation can accomplish everything that needs to be done. We can only succeed together. Therefore, let the world know, no matter what happens. We didn't stand still watching it burn. We gave them hell, together. The four horsemen of the economic apocalypse. And damn anyone who tries to say otherwise. Signed, Dark Philosopher. For more content, including our trends analysis, see our Substack at darkphilosopher.substack.com or join the conversation on Twitter at Observer Trends. Be sure to join the community so you don't miss out on future articles. Thank you for listening, and good luck.